The millionaire finds this 4-year-old beggar girl praying in the desert for 24 hours straight. You won't believe why she's doing it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the Arizona desert when Theodore Albright's private jet began to malfunction. Instruments flashed frantically on the dashboard as the pilot struggled to keep the aircraft stable. Theodore, seated in his Italian leather chair, maintained the impassive expression that had made him famous in the business world. At 62, the owner of the largest supermarket chain in the American Southwest showed no fear, even when the pilot announced they would have to make an emergency landing. The impact was smoother than expected, but still caused considerable damage to the aircraft. While the technical team assessed the damage and made contact via radio, Theodore decided to walk around the area. The businessman adjusted his Italian suit, ignoring the heat that made his face sweat, and began to walk across the arid desert landscape. That's when something inexplicable caught his attention. A small figure kneeling under the relentless sun, as still as a statue. Initially, he thought it was a mirage caused by the heat, but as he approached, the image became clearer. It was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, wearing a simple cotton dress and her brown hair tied in 2 messy braids. What's this? A child doing here alone, Theodore thought, feeling a growing irritation at what he considered parental negligence. The girl kept her hands clasped in prayer, murmuring words he couldn't distinguish. Her chapped lips and sun-reddened skin indicated she had been there for a long time. "Hey, kid!" he called out in his deep, authoritative voice, the same one he used to intimidate executives in business meetings. The child didn't move. "Hey, you, where are your parents?" Finally, she opened her eyes. Theodore felt something strange upon meeting her gaze. They were deep, intense brown eyes that conveyed a determination he had never seen in someone so young. "I can't leave here," she replied in a surprisingly firm voice. "I need to complete 24 hours of prayer." "That's crazy. You're going to get sick," Theodore argued, increasingly annoyed. "What's your name?" "Olivia," she replied simply, closing her eyes again and clasping her hands. Something about that scene deeply disturbed the businessman. He, who had always prided himself on his rationality, who had built an empire based on cold, calculated decisions, felt inexplicably uneasy in the presence of that small figure. "At least have some water," he insisted, extending his imported stainless steel water bottle. The girl hesitated for a moment, but took a few sips before returning the container. "Why are you doing this?" Theodore asked, surprising himself with the softer tone in his voice. Olivia opened her eyes again, and this time Theodore noticed they were teary. "My mum is sick, very sick. Dr. Miller said she only has 3 months. The information hit Theodore like a punch to the stomach. "And you think staying here praying will help?" "Grandma Betty told me there's a legend. If someone prays for 24 hours in the most barren spot in the Arizona desert, their greatest wish will be granted," Olivia explained, with a conviction that made Theodore feel uncomfortable. "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday morning," she replied, returning to her prayer position. Theodore checked his Patek Philippe watch. It was almost 10 a.m. If the girl was telling the truth, she had been there for almost 24 hours, without food, with little water, under the relentless desert sun. "Does your mother know you're here?" Olivia shook her head. "She's working. She always works hard, even when she's sick." Something in the way the girl spoke triggered a distant memory in Theodore. "What's your mother's name?" "Maris," Olivia replied, and the name fell like a bomb on Theodore. Maris, the name he had been trying to forget for years, that his lawyers had insisted he ignore. The employee he fired without hesitation when she asked for time off to care for her newborn daughter with respiratory problems. At the time, he considered it just another necessary business decision. Now, looking at Olivia, the consequence of his actions gained a face, a name, a story. The pilot appeared in the distance, waving to indicate that the repairs were almost complete. Theodore should go back. He had an important meeting in Phoenix in a few hours, but something kept him there, trapped in that surreal moment with a child praying in the desert. "I'll stay with you," he said, surprising himself, "until you complete the 24 hours. Olivia didn't respond, but a small smile appeared on her chapped lips. Theodore loosened his tie, sat on the dusty ground, ruining his $15,000 Italian suit, and for the first time in decades felt he was exactly where he should be. The following hours passed in silence, punctuated only by the murmurs of Olivia's prayers and the sound of the desert wind. Theodore watched the girl, amazed by her endurance and determination. Occasionally, he insisted that she drink more water, worried about her dehydration. The sun began to dip below the horizon when Olivia finally completed her 24 hours of prayer. She tried to get up, but her legs faltered. Before she fell, Theodore caught her in his arms. "I need to take you home," he said, feeling the girl's small, feverish body. "Did it work?" Olivia asked, her voice just a whisper. "Will my mum be okay?" Theodore felt something strange in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. "We'll find out," he replied, carrying her toward the jet. The private jet cut through the orange sunset sky, while Olivia, wrapped in an Egyptian wool blanket, slept soundly in Theodore's arms. The businessman watched her serene face, trying to understand how that small creature had managed to shake his foundations so deeply in just a few hours. Following the directions the girl had mumbled before falling asleep, they soon spotted the small house by the side of the road leading to the desert. It was a simple construction, with peeling walls and a roof that needed repairs, but the small garden in front, even scorched by the sun, showed signs of care. Pieces of colorful crafts adorned the porch, creating a vibrant contrast to the aridity of the surroundings. Theodore felt a pang in his chest as he thought that this was the direct result of his business decision years ago. Before they could land in the open field near the house, they saw a female figure running desperately down the dirt road, shouting Olivia's name. Maris looked even thinner than Theodore remembered, her face marked by deep, dark circles and a pallor that didn't match the desert climate. When the jet finally landed and the door opened, Theodore stepped out carrying Olivia in his arms. Maris froze upon recognizing him, her face turning into a mask of shock and then fury. "What have you done to my daughter?" she shouted, rushing toward him with a strength her weakened body didn't seem to possess. "I found her in the desert praying," Theodore explained, keeping his voice calm as he handed Olivia to her mother's arms. She had been almost 24 hours without food, practically without water. Maris hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you do this, my love? Why did you run away like that? I was desperate." Olivia, still sleepy, opened her eyes. "Sorry, Mom, but I needed to finish the prayer for you." "What prayer? What are you talking about?" "The legend Grandma Betty told me," Olivia replied, her voice small but determined, "about the wish that comes true after 24 hours of prayer in the most barren spot in the Arizona desert." Maris paled even more, if that was possible. You overheard my conversation with Dr. Miller." Olivia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't want you to leave like Dad did. I needed to try." Theodore's heart tightened even more upon hearing those words. Maris hugged her daughter tighter, as if she could protect her from the harsh reality they faced. "Mrs. Maris," Theodore began, his voice softer than it had ever been in a negotiation. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," she cut him off sharply. "You already did enough to this family 6 years ago when you fired me without any consideration. Please, he insisted. "It's about the treatment you need. I can help." "I don't need your charity," Maris exclaimed, but a fit of coughing interrupted her fury. She staggered, and Theodore instinctively grabbed her arm. "Mom!" Olivia cried, frightened. "It's not charity," Theodore said, helping Maris sit down on a chair on the porch. "It's a debt I owe you, and more than that, it's something I need to do." At that moment, an elderly woman approached the house, carrying a shopping bag. It was Betty, Olivia's grandmother, who stopped when she saw the unusual scene on her porch. "Theodore Albright?" she asked, widening her eyes. "The owner of Albright's supermarkets?" "Mrs. Betty," he greeted her, recognizing her from the old employee gatherings. "You haven't changed a bit." "But you have," she replied, with a penetrating gaze that made Theodore feel exposed. "There's something different in your eyes today." Maris tried to get up, but her legs faltered again. Theodore and Betty supported her, taking her inside the simple but impeccably tidy house. "Daughter, you need to rest," Betty said, worried. "You've worked too much again today." "I can't rest," Maris protested weakly. "I have to finish the crafts for the Sunday market." "What do you have?" Theodore asked, watching how she could barely stay seated. It was Betty who answered, while helping her daughter lie down on the couch. "It's a rare bone marrow disease. Dr. Miller said there's treatment, but..." She hesitated, looking at Olivia, who was hugging her mother's legs. "But it costs more money than we could ever save," Maris completed bitterly, "even working in 3 different places." Theodore sat down on a simple wooden chair, feeling the weight of his past actions. "I can pay for the treatment, all of it. I already said I don't want your charity," Maris protested. "Then don't consider it charity," he replied, his voice firm. "Consider it an investment. Your daughter has a special gift, something I noticed in the few hours I spent with her, a determination and a strength that are rare." As if to confirm his words, Olivia got up and went to a corner of the room, returning with some papers. They were drawings, surprisingly detailed for a child her age, mixed with complex mathematical calculations. "Where did you learn this?" Theodore asked, impressed. "From the tourists who pass by," Olivia replied shyly. "I watch them doing calculations, measuring the distances to the waterfalls. And I also find some books that people leave behind." Betty took more drawings from a drawer. "She's really special. The teachers at the school say they've never seen anything like it, but we can't afford to give her the education she deserves." Theodore examined the papers with growing attention. There was a raw talent there, something that reminded him of his own passion for mathematics when he was young, before the business world turned him into someone cold and calculating. "Maris," he said, turning to the woman on the couch, "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a chance to correct my mistake. And more than that, I'm offering an opportunity to invest in your daughter's future." Before Maris could answer, a severe dizziness overcame her and she fainted on the couch. Olivia screamed, frightened, while Betty ran to check on her daughter. "She needs help now," said the old woman in panic. "We can't wait any longer." Theodore didn't hesitate. He picked up Maris in his arms, surprised at how light she was, and walked towards the door. "Where are you going to take her?" asked Betty, holding Olivia, who was crying. "To the best clinic in Phoenix," he replied, "where my personal doctor, Dr. Harrison, will take care of her. And this time, Maris will have no choice but to accept my help." While carrying Maris to the jet, with Olivia and Betty following close behind, Theodore felt a sharp pain in his chest, something that had been happening frequently in recent weeks. He ignored the discomfort, focusing only on saving the life of the woman in his arms. What he didn't know yet was that that pain would be the first sign of a condition that would completely change the course of his own existence. St. Francis Hospital, the most luxurious in Phoenix, had never witnessed a scene like that. Theodore Albright, known for his always impeccable posture, crossed the corridors with clothes dirty from the desert, carrying an unconscious woman in his arms, followed by an elderly woman and a child. The receptionist barely had time to register the entrance before he ordered the immediate presence of Dr. Harrison. While the medical team mobilized to attend to Maris, Theodore felt the pain in his chest intensify. Discreetly, he took one of the pills he always carried with him, without anyone noticing. He couldn't show weakness, not now that so many people depended on him. "Grandma, is Mom going to be okay?" Olivia asked, her small voice echoing in the luxurious waiting room. The girl held tightly to one of her drawings, as if it were a protective amulet. "Yes, my love," Betty replied, trying to hide her own worry. "Dr. Harrison is the best doctor in the state. Isn't that right, Mr. Albright?" Before he could answer, Dr. Harrison himself appeared in the hallway. He was a man of 64 with grey hair and a gentle expression, who had been taking care of Theodore's health for decades. "We need to talk," said the doctor, his serious tone causing apprehension in everyone. "Mrs. Betty, could you stay with the girl while I talk to Mr. Albright?" Theodore followed the doctor to his office, feeling his heart beat irregularly. The white walls and the smell of antiseptic seemed to suffocate him. "The situation is serious, Theodore," Harrison began as soon as he closed the door. "The bone marrow disease is in an advanced stage. But there's something else that worries me. Preliminary tests showed a significant alteration in her blood, something I've never seen before." "What do you mean?" Theodore asked, sitting heavily in one of the chairs. "It's as if her immune system is fighting in a unique way. And that made me think of the experimental treatment I've been developing, the same one I suggested for your case." Theodore stiffened in the chair. For weeks, he had been avoiding thinking about the diagnosis he had received, a rare and aggressive heart condition that gave him less than a year to live. "Doctor, now is not the time to talk about my case. We need to save Maris." "That's exactly what I'm trying to explain," Harrison continued, his eyes shining with scientific enthusiasm. "The treatment I developed could work for both cases, but the cost is astronomical, and the health insurance doesn't cover experimental procedures. Even for someone with your resources, Theodore, funding 2 simultaneous treatments would be—" "How much?" Theodore cut him off. The doctor wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Theodore stared at the zeros, feeling the weight of the decision he would have to make. "Start her treatment immediately," he said, finally. "As for my case, we'll see later. But Theodore, your condition is equally serious. If we don't start soon—" A scream from the hallway interrupted the conversation. It was Olivia's voice. The 2 men ran out of the room, finding the girl crying before Maris, who had regained consciousness and was stubbornly trying to get out of the hospital bed. "I'm not staying," Maris shouted, her weak voice contrasting with the determination in her eyes. "I can't pay for this. I don't want to owe anything to anyone." "Mom, please," Olivia pleaded, clinging to the rails of the bed. "You promised you wouldn't leave me alone like Dad did." Those words seemed to hit Maris like a physical blow. She collapsed on the bed, silent tears streaming down her pale face. "Mrs. Maris," Dr. Harrison intervened, approaching with his calm and professional voice. "We've discovered something interesting in your tests. You may be the key to a revolutionary treatment. Your participation would be fundamental to medical research." Theodore watched the doctor's strategy in admiration. By presenting the treatment as a contribution to science instead of charity, he offered Maris a way to maintain her pride. "What kind of research?" she asked, still suspicious but visibly interested. As the doctor explained the technical details, Theodore felt a small hand hold his. Olivia looked at him with those deep eyes that seemed to see into his soul. "Your heart is hurt too, isn't it?" she whispered, surprising him. How do you know?" In response, Olivia opened the drawing she was holding. It wasn't a common child's drawing. It was a complex diagram of the human heart, with mathematical annotations in the margins that, although written in childish handwriting, demonstrated a surprising understanding of proportions and patterns. "I dreamed about it," she explained, pointing to a specific area of the drawing. "It hurts here, doesn't it?" Theodore felt a shiver run down his spine. It was exactly where the doctors had detected the anomaly in his heart. At that moment, Betty approached them, carrying an old bag from which she took more of Olivia's drawings. "She's been doing these drawings since she was little," the woman explained. "It started after her father left. It's like she can see inside people, understand their pain." Theodore examined the other drawings, impressed by the precision of the anatomical details and the complexity of the calculations in the margins. How could a 6-year-old child, who had barely started formal literacy, produce something like this? "Dr. Harrison," he called, interrupting the medical explanation, "I need you to see this." The doctor approached, and upon examining Olivia's drawings, his expression changed from curiosity to astonishment. "This is extraordinary," he murmured, taking his glasses to examine the annotations better. "These patterns are very similar to some theories I've been developing for the treatment." Maris watched the scene with a mixture of pride and concern. She's always been different. At school, the teachers don't know what to do with her. They say her knowledge is far beyond her age, especially in math. "It's not just math, Mom," Olivia interrupted, her voice small but firm. "I see the numbers dancing when I look at people. They show me where the pain is, where it needs to be fixed." A deep silence fell over the group. Dr. Harrison continued examining the drawings, mumbling to himself and making quick notes in his notepad. "Theodore," he said finally, "we need to talk again, in private." Once again in the doctor's office, Theodore sat down, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. The pain in his chest had subsided, but a new sense of urgency dominated him. "This girl's drawings," Harrison began, spreading the papers on his desk. "They show an approach I never considered for the treatment. It's as if she naturally intuited something that would take years of research to discover." "What exactly?" "A way to synchronize the bone marrow treatment with heart regeneration. If it works." The doctor paused, as if hesitant to express too much hope. "We could not only save Maris, but also find a solution for your condition." Theodore felt his heart skip a beat. "Are you sure?" "Absolute certainty we will only have by testing, but look at these mathematical patterns in the drawings. They correspond exactly to the cellular frequencies I've been studying. How can a 6-year-old child know this?" Before Theodore could answer, a commotion in the hallway caught his attention. Upon opening the door, he found Olivia passed out in Betty's arms, pale and with a high fever. "It's exhaustion," explained the nurse who ran to help. 24 hours in the desert without food." Theodore picked up the girl in his arms, feeling her small and hot body. At that moment, he made a decision that would forever change the course of several lives. "Dr. Harrison," he said, his voice firm, "prepare 2 rooms, the best in the hospital. Maris and Olivia will not leave here until they are completely recovered, and in the meantime, we will study every detail of these drawings. Something tells me that this girl came to show us a path that none of us would be able to find alone." The following days at St. Francis Hospital were intense and transformative. Theodore converted an entire wing of the 10th floor into a kind of makeshift home for Maris, Olivia, and Betty. While the first 2 received treatment, the grandmother remained as a tireless guardian, her watchful eyes observing every move of the doctors and nurses who entered and left the rooms. To everyone's surprise, Theodore began to appear every day, always at the same time, carrying an old leather briefcase under his arm. Inside it, he carefully kept each new drawing that Olivia produced. The girl, even still recovering from exhaustion, didn't stop creating her intriguing mathematical diagrams. "You're also different inside," Olivia said one afternoon, while drawing something that looked like a complex equation intertwined with blood vessels. The numbers around your heart are changing. Theodore, who was sitting in an armchair next to her bed, looked up from the financial reports he was analyzing. "What do you mean, sweetie? Before they were dark, heavy numbers. Now they have colors. It's like they're dancing a new song." She stopped for a moment, frowning in concentration. "But there's still a sad part here." She pointed to the left side of his chest. The businessman felt a lump in his throat. It was exactly where the latest exams had detected a worsening of his condition. How could she know? In the next room, Maris also showed surprising changes. Dr. Harrison's experimental treatment, adapted according to Olivia's mathematical intuitions, began to show promising results. Her pallor gradually decreased, and she was already able to walk through the corridors without help. On a particularly significant morning, while Maris was doing her physical therapy exercises, Theodore watched her discreetly through the window of the rehabilitation room. She had an inner strength that he had never noticed before, a dignity that remained intact even after everything she had faced. She never complained, you know. Betty's voice surprised him. The woman had approached silently. "Even on the most difficult days, when we barely had anything to eat, Maris always found a way to make Olivia smile." Theodore felt the weight of guilt increase in his chest. "How did you survive all these years?" "At first, it was very difficult. After the dismissal, Maris tried to find another formal job, but with a sick baby needing constant care, no one wanted to hire her." Betty paused, her eyes lost in memories. "That's when we discovered crafts. I started teaching Maris the techniques I learned from my mother. Little by little, we built a small clientele among the tourists who passed by the desert road. And Olivia's father, did he never look for them?" A flash of anger passed through the woman's eyes. "That coward. He disappeared as soon as he found out that Olivia had been born with respiratory problems. He said he didn't have the structure to raise a sick child." At that moment, a scream from Olivia's room interrupted the conversation. The two ran there, finding the girl sitting on the bed, her eyes wide, holding a new drawing with trembling hands. "What is it, my love?" asked Betty, running to hug her granddaughter. "The numbers, Grandma. They're different today. There's something wrong with Uncle Theodore." Before anyone could react, Theodore felt a stabbing pain in his chest, much stronger than the previous ones. His legs buckled, and he needed to lean against the wall. Dr. Harrison, who was passing by in the hallway, at that moment ran to support him. "Enough of playing the strong man," said the doctor, quickly calling a nursing team. "You need to be hospitalized now." "No!" Theodore protested, but another spasm of pain prevented him from continuing. As he was being rushed to the ICU, he could hear Olivia's voice shouting something about red numbers and a broken pattern. The girl's words mixed with the sound of medical devices and the urgent voices of the team. Hours later, when he regained consciousness, Theodore found an unusual scene in his room. Olivia was sitting in a chair next to his bed, focused on a new drawing. Maris, still wearing her patient clothes, was standing near the window, her face a mask of concern, and Betty was knitting silently in a corner, as if standing guard. What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You had a serious crisis," replied Dr. Harrison, who entered the room at that moment. "If it weren't for Olivia's warning, I saw the numbers turning red." The girl interrupted, without taking her eyes off her drawing. "They were screaming for help." Maris approached the bed, her eyes meeting Theodore's for the first time, without hostility. "Why didn't you tell us about your illness? I didn't want you to worry about me. You already have enough problems." "You're silly," Olivia said, finally looking up from the paper. "Everyone needs help sometimes. Even the numbers know that." Dr. Harrison picked up the drawing that Olivia had just made, and his face lit up. "This is extraordinary. Look at this." The drawing showed two circulatory systems interconnected by complex mathematical patterns. On one side, clearly representing Theodore's heart, the numbers appeared in red. On the other side, representing Maris, the numbers were blue and green. "It's as if she had mapped the compatibility between the two systems," explained the doctor, his voice trembling with excitement. "This could be the key to a revolutionary treatment that would benefit both." "What do you mean?" asked Maris, approaching to examine the drawing. "The experimental treatment I developed, it works with the idea that specific stem cells can be programmed to regenerate both heart tissue and bone marrow. What Olivia drew here suggests a synchronization pattern between the two processes that we had never considered." Theodore tried to sit up in bed, but a dizziness made him recoil. "Are you saying we could be treated together?" "Not only that," continued the doctor, increasingly excited. "The approach that Olivia intuited could significantly increase the chances of success for both cases." "But the cost," Maris began, her voice faltering. "Money is not a problem," Theodore cut her off. "I have enough resources to—" "It's not just a matter of money," interrupted Dr. Harrison, his expression becoming serious. "The treatment would be extremely delicate. It would require perfect synchronization between the procedures. And more importantly, we would need the full cooperation of both patients." A heavy silence fell over the room. Maris bit her lip, clearly divided between her pride and the possibility of healing. Theodore stared at the ceiling, processing all. The implications. It was Olivia who broke the silence. "The numbers say you need to trust each other, like a dance. If one misses the step, the other falls." Betty got up from her chair, leaving the knitting aside. "Maris, my daughter, sometimes pride needs to give way to forgiveness. And you, Mr. Theodore, sometimes we need to accept help from those we hurt the most." At that moment, another alarm began to sound on the devices connected to Theodore. His pressure was rising dangerously. "We need a quick decision," urged Dr. Harrison. "Time is against us." Maris took a step forward, her hands trembling slightly. "If this can save us, if it can guarantee that Olivia doesn't become an orphan, I accept." Theodore felt tears forming in his eyes, something that hadn't happened in decades. "I accept, too, but with one condition." "What?" asked Maris, suspicious. "That he allows me to do more than just pay for the treatment. I want to help Olivia develop her extraordinary gift. She needs the best education, the best teachers." "Uncle Theodore," Olivia interrupted, her voice surprisingly mature. "The numbers already knew you were going to say that. They're smiling now." And so, in that hospital room, an unlikely agreement was born. While Dr. Harrison rushed to prepare the protocols for the experimental treatment, Theodore watched Maris embrace Olivia, both crying silently. Betty had resumed her knitting, but now her needles danced in a different rhythm, as if accompanying a song that only she could hear. What none of them knew was that that decision would trigger a series of events that would transform not only their lives, but also medicine's understanding of the connection between body, mind, and numbers. The news that Theodore Albright, the supermarket tycoon, was hospitalized at St. Francis Hospital spread quickly through Phoenix business circles. Within days, the hospital reception was flooded with flower arrangements and get-well cards from people who, for the most part, Theodore barely knew. The board of directors of his supermarket chain was in an uproar, especially when he refused to participate in virtual meetings, claiming he needed to focus on his recovery. What no one knew was that on the 10th floor of the hospital, a silent revolution was taking place. Dr. Harrison had transformed one of the suites into a makeshift laboratory, where he spent hours studying Olivia's drawings and adapting his experimental treatment. The walls, once antiseptically white, were now covered with colorful diagrams made by the girl, creating a surreal contrast with the state-of-the-art medical equipment. "The patterns are becoming clearer and clearer," the doctor explained one morning while examining Olivia's latest creations. "It's as if she can visualize the dance of the cells at a level that our most advanced equipment can't capture." Maris, who was sitting in an armchair near the window, watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Olivia was completely absorbed in a new drawing, her small fingers moving precisely over the paper as she murmured numbers to herself. "But how is this possible, Doctor?" she asked, adjusting the scarf that covered her head. The chemotherapy preparatory to the experimental treatment had caused her hair to start falling out. She's never had access to advanced medicine or mathematics books. "There are documented cases of natural mathematical intuition in children," Harrison replied, adjusting his glasses. "But what Olivia demonstrates goes beyond that. It's as if she can see fundamental patterns of life." On the other side of the room, Betty knitted silently, as she always did when she was worried. Her needles moved in the same rhythm as Olivia's, numerical murmurs, creating a strange symphony. "She's always been different," the woman said, without taking her eyes off her knitting. "Even as a baby, when she was sick with those respiratory problems, she looked at people in a way as if she could see through them." At that moment, Theodore entered the room, pushing his IV stand. Despite the protests of the medical team, he insisted on making the short walk from his room to there every day. "I brought a surprise for you, Olivia," he said, taking something from a leather folder. It was a thick book on number theory, clearly too advanced for a 6-year-old child. Maris made a move to protest, but before she could say anything, Olivia looked up from her drawing, her face lighting up. "The numbers in the book are singing!" she exclaimed, reaching out eagerly. To everyone's astonishment, the girl began to leaf through the book with genuine interest, her eyes shining as she passed through complex equations that would confuse even college students. "Look, Mom!" She pointed to a specific page. "It's the same as what happens in your blood when you take the new medicine." Dr. Harrison approached quickly, examining the indicated page. It was an explanation about Fibonacci sequences and their relationship to growth patterns in nature. "Extraordinary," he murmured, making quick notes. "This could explain why the treatment is working better at some times than at others. We need to synchronize the doses with these natural patterns." While the doctor lost himself in his notes, Theodore watched Maris discreetly. She was stronger in recent days, her cheeks gaining a little color, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow of concern that went beyond her own illness. "What is it?" he asked, approaching her armchair. Maris hesitated for a moment, playing with the fringe of the shawl that covered her shoulders. "I'm worried about Olivia," she said, finally lowering her voice. "What if her gift attracts the wrong kind of attention? What if they try to turn her into some kind of experiment?" Theodore sat down in the chair next to her, ignoring the stab of pain in his chest that the movement caused. "I won't let that happen," he said firmly. "I promise." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, turning to face him. "A few weeks ago, we were just ex-employees that you didn't even remember existed." The question hit Theodore like a punch to the stomach. Why did he care so much? The answer came like a flash of memory. His own father, a hard man who never understood his passion for numbers and calculations as a child, who forced him to follow the path of business instead of his true vocation for mathematics. "Because I see in Olivia something I lost a long time ago," he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The purity of knowledge, the joy of discovering, and patterns in chaos, and because—" He paused, gathering courage. "Because when I found her praying in the desert, I realized how much time I wasted chasing the wrong things." Before Maris could answer, a commotion at the door of the room caught everyone's attention, It was Richard Miller, the chairman of the supermarket board, accompanied by two dark-suited executives. "Theodore!" exclaimed Richard, his face red with irritation. "What's this story about you having authorized a very expensive experimental treatment for a former employee? The board is in an uproar." The silence that fell over the room was cutting. Olivia stopped flipping through her book, her wide eyes fixed on the newcomers. Betty squeezed her knitting needles so hard that one of them broke. Theodore stood up slowly, disconnecting his IV with a decisive movement. "Richard," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "my private life and my medical decisions are not the board's business." "They are when you're spending a fortune on unapproved procedures," Richard retorted, "and even more so when we find out that you intend to create a foundation to—" He stopped abruptly, realizing he had said too much. "How did you know about that?" Theodore asked, his eyes narrowing. "That information was only on my personal computer." Richard's face paled slightly. At that moment, Olivia got up from her chair, walking directly to him with one of her drawings in her hands. "Your numbers are very dark, Uncle," she said, holding out the paper. "And there's a black spot here, where your heart should be." Richard took a step back, visibly disturbed by the child. "What nonsense is this? Theodore, you're being manipulated by these people. They just want your money." "Enough!" Maris's voice cut through the air like a whip. She stood up, tearing the scarf off her head in a gesture of fury, revealing her partial baldness. "How dare you? How dare you come in here and accuse us after everything we've been through?" Dr. Harrison placed himself between the groups, his normally calm presence now emanating authority. "Gentlemen, this is a hospital. If you can't maintain civility, I'll have to ask you to leave." This isn't over, Theodore," Richard threatened, retreating toward the door. "The board will take action." After they left, Theodore fell heavily into a chair, his face pale with anger and exhaustion. Olivia approached him, placing her small hand on his chest. "The numbers are agitated now," she said, worried. "They need to calm down, otherwise the treatment won't work right." But Maris and Betty exchanged worried glances. Dr. Harrison quickly checked Theodore's vital signs, frowning at the heart monitor. "She's right," said the doctor. "We need to keep your stress under control, or the treatment may be compromised." Theodore closed his eyes, trying to control his breathing. "Richard was always ambitious," he murmured, "but hacking into my personal computer, he must be desperate to take control of the company." "What are we going to do?" asked Maris, sitting next to him. "We?" Theodore opened his eyes, surprised by the inclusive pronoun. "Yes, we," she replied firmly. "You're helping us, so we're going to help you too. I'm not going to let them destroy you because of us." Olivia, who had returned to her drawing, began to murmur louder than normal. Everyone turned to look at her. "The numbers are showing away," she said, her fingers moving furiously over the paper. "But first, Uncle Theodore and Mom need to get better. The rest will be resolved when the patterns are right." Dr. Harrison picked up the new drawing, his eyes widening. This is revolutionary. Olivia, you've just solved one of the main problems of the treatment." While the doctor lost himself in technical explanations about stem cells and regeneration patterns, Theodore and Maris exchanged a meaningful look. Something had changed between them. It was no longer just a relationship of debtor and creditor, of guilty and victim. It was an alliance, forged by adversity and the inexplicable faith of a child who saw the world through numbers. Betty, who was watching everything in silence, picked up a new knitting needle and resumed her work, a small smile on her lips. Like Olivia with her numbers, she also saw patterns forming. Patterns of healing, not only of bodies, but also of souls. St. Francis Hospital became a silent fortress in the weeks that followed. Theodore, anticipating possible problems after Richard's hostile visit, provided discreet security at all entrances to the 10th floor. The experimental treatment entered its most critical phase, and the last thing they needed was external interference. On a particularly tense morning, while Maris was preparing for another session of treatment, Theodore received a call that made his face pale. It was his lawyer, Beatrice Morgan, a 55-year-old woman, known for her cunning in court. "Richard has called an extraordinary meeting of the board," she informed him, her voice grave. "He's trying to use your absence and the unauthorized medical expenses as justification for a temporary suspension." Theodore sat heavily in the armchair in his room, feeling his heart race dangerously. The heart monitors began to beep, attracting the attention of a passing nurse. "How much time do we have?" he asked, gesturing for the nurse not to worry. "The meeting is scheduled for 3 days from now. Theodore, they have documents, your emails, personal financial records. Someone had access to your system." At that moment, Olivia entered the room carrying a pile of drawings. Seeing Theodore's expression, she immediately dropped everything and ran to him. "The numbers are screaming again," she said, placing her hand on his chest. "You need to calm them down, Uncle Theodore, like Mom does when she's nervous. Takes a deep breath and thinks about beautiful things." The simplicity of childhood wisdom made Theodore smile despite the situation. "Beatrice," he said on the phone, "I need you to buy time. The treatment can't be interrupted now." After hanging up, he watched Olivia rearranging her drawings on the floor. There was something different about them today. They were more complex, with patterns that intertwined in ways he had never seen before. "What are these, sweetie?" he asked, trying to distract himself from his worries. "These are Mr. Miller's numbers," she replied, focused. "They're all wrong, messed up. It's like they've been scratched off and written over." Theodore frowned, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Before Olivia could answer, Dr. Harrison rushed into the room, his eyes shining, with that characteristic excitement he always demonstrated when he made a discovery. "Theodore, you need to see this," he exclaimed, carrying a folder full of exams. "The results of the latest tests are extraordinary. The synchronization between your treatment and Maris's is working exactly as Olivia predicted." The doctor spread the exams on the bed, pointing to various images and graphs. "Look here, the stem cells are behaving in a way we've never documented before. It's as if there's communication between the two systems, a kind of coordinated dance that's accelerating the healing process in both cases." At that moment, Maris appeared at the door, supported by Betty. She was stronger, her eyes shining with a vitality she hadn't shown in weeks. "The nausea has decreased," she announced, sitting in a chair nearby. "And today I managed to eat a whole meal without problems." Olivia looked up from her drawings, smiling. "It's because Mom's and Uncle Theodore's numbers are learning to dance together, but..." Her expression became serious suddenly. "There's a storm coming. Mr. Miller's numbers are making bad noise." Theodore and Maris exchanged worried glances. Betty, who as always was knitting in her corner, stopped her movements. "Daughter," she said to Olivia, "what kind of bad noise?" The girl picked up one of her drawings, showing a chaotic pattern of red and black lines. "It's like when the heavy rain comes and scares the little birds at home. Everyone wants to hide, but there's nowhere to go." Dr. Harrison examined the drawing with scientific interest. "Fascinating. The mathematical structures here are similar to patterns of chaotic behavior in complex systems. It's as if she's predicting a significant disturbance." "We don't need advanced math to predict that," Theodore said, running a hand over his tired face. "Richard will try to remove me from the company presidency, and if he succeeds, the treatment may be interrupted." "No!" exclaimed Maris, standing up abruptly. "They can't do that. It's our only chance." Theodore's heart monitor began to beep, louder, reflecting his growing agitation. Olivia immediately dropped her drawings and ran to him, placing both hands on his chest. "Calm down," she said, with surprising authority for someone so small. "The numbers don't like it when the heart gets too agitated. They need to dance slowly like a waltz." At that moment, a nurse ran into the room. "Dr. Harrison, there's a news crew trying to get up to the 10th floor. They say they have information about an irregular experimental treatment happening here." Chaos erupted in the room. Theodore tried to get up, but a severe dizziness caused him to fall back into the armchair. Maris hugged Olivia protectively, while Betty positioned herself in front of the two as a human shield. "This is Richard's doing," Theodore said, his voice weak but filled with anger. "He's trying to create a scandal to force my removal." Dr. Harrison took control of the situation with surprising calm. "I'll deal with the press. Theodore, you're not in a condition to stress. Maris, take Olivia to the treatment room and lock the door. Mrs. Betty, please stay with them." As everyone moved following the doctor's instructions, Olivia broke free from her mother's embrace and ran back to Theodore. She took one of her most recent drawings and placed it in his hands. "Keep this," she said, her eyes big and serious. "The numbers showed me you'll need it when the storm gets stronger." Theodore looked at the paper in his hands. It was different from all of Olivia's other drawings. Instead of chaotic mathematical patterns or complex medical diagrams, it showed a sequence of numbers that strangely resembled financial records. "What is this, sweetie?" he asked, intrigued. "They're Mr. Miller's lying numbers," she replied simply. "The ones he scratched off and wrote over, remember? But the true numbers are still down there, crying to be discovered." Before Theodore could fully process what that meant, Maris returned and quickly took Olivia to the treatment room. Betty followed the two, not without casting a meaningful glance at Theodore. "You know," the woman said, pausing briefly at the door, "my granddaughter has always had a special gift for seeing the truth through numbers. But since she started this treatment with you, it seems that that gift has become even stronger. It's as if you two have a connection that goes beyond medicine." As the noise of the commotion with the press grew in the corridors, Theodore examined Olivia's drawing more closely. Gradually, his look of confusion turned to understanding, then to surprise, and finally to something resembling hope. He took out his cell phone and dialed Beatrice again. "I need you to come to the hospital immediately," he said, his voice regaining its strength, "and bring a forensic accountant. I think we've just discovered how Richard is planning to bring me down, and more importantly, how we can stop him." On the other side of the corridor, through the closed door of the treatment room, one could hear Olivia murmuring numbers in sequence, as if she were singing a lullaby to soothe not only her own fears, but those of everyone around her. Night fell on St. Francis Hospital like a heavy blanket of expectations. In the silent corridors of the 10th floor, only the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional hurried passing of the nursing staff broke the silence. In Theodore's room, an unlikely meeting was taking place. Beatrice Morgan, the lawyer, was sitting in an armchair, her reading glasses reflecting the light as she examined Olivia's drawing with an expression of utter bewilderment. Beside her, Albert Swanson, a renowned forensic accountant of 60 years, mumbled to himself while furiously scribbling notes on his tablet. "It's impressive," said Albert, finally breaking the silence. "These numerical patterns that the girl drew, they correspond exactly to the type of sequence we find in cases of sophisticated accounting fraud." "What do you mean?" asked Maris, who was sitting on the edge of Theodore's bed, defying all the rules of social hierarchy that had previously governed their relationship. "Well," explained Albert, adjusting his tortoise-shell glasses, "when someone manipulates financial records, they usually leave mathematical traces. They're like echoes of the original numbers. This child somehow managed to visualize these patterns and translate them into a drawing." Theodore leaned forward, ignoring the stab of pain in his chest. "And what exactly do these patterns show?" "Diversions," replied the expert, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Large diversions of money from the company disguised as investments in phantom subsidiaries. And all the documents have one thing in common: Richard Miller's digital signature." Beatrice removed her glasses, rubbing her tired eyes. "That would explain his haste to try to remove you, Theodore. With you out of the way, he could cover up the diversions before anyone noticed." At that moment, a soft sound of footsteps caught everyone's attention. Olivia was standing at the door of the room, still wearing her unicorn pajamas, her big and serious eyes fixed on the group of adults. "The bad numbers are getting weaker," she said, entering the room, "but there are more of them hidden somewhere else." Betty appeared right behind her granddaughter, her knitting needles tinkling softly. "Sorry." She insisted she needed to come. She said the numbers were calling. Olivia walked straight to the folder of documents that Albert was analyzing. With the naturalness of someone doing something perfectly normal, she began to draw new patterns next to the printed numbers. "Look!" exclaimed Albert, leaning over the girl's work. "She's marking exactly the points where the accounting inconsistencies are most evident. How is it possible?" "I no longer question what is possible since I found her praying in the desert," Theodore murmured, watching. Olivia worked with a mixture of admiration and amazement. The girl continued drawing for a few minutes, her little tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Suddenly, she stopped and looked at Theodore with those eyes that seemed to see through the soul. "There are sad numbers kept in the big house computer," she said. "The house with the blue windows where Mr. Miller works when he's not at the supermarket." Beatrice straightened up in her chair. "Richard's country house, of course. He always boasted about keeping a private office there, away from the eyes of the company." "We need a search warrant," said Albert, already typing notes on his tablet. "With this preliminary evidence and a proper forensic analysis." "There's no time," interrupted Theodore, his voice weak but resolute. "The board meeting is in 2 days. Richard must already be preparing the ground, winning votes." At that moment, Dr. Harrison entered the room, carrying a new set of exams. His worried expression made everyone silent. "Theodore," he said after checking the heart monitors, "your heart isn't responding well to all this stress. We need to focus on the treatment now, or all the progress we've made may be lost." "What about Mom?" asked Olivia, abandoning her drawings and running to the doctor. "Are her numbers dancing right?" Dr. Harrison knelt down to be at the girl's height, a soft smile on his face. "Yes, sweetie, your mom is responding extraordinarily well to the treatment. In fact," he paused, looking at Maris, "the latest tests show bone marrow regeneration that I've never seen in my entire career." Maris brought her hand to her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. "So, it's really working?" "Yes, but..." The doctor hesitated, looking at Theodore. "The synchronization between the two treatments is crucial. If we interrupt it now, the risks are immense for both." A heavy silence fell over the room. Beatrice flipped through her notes nervously, while Albert continued studying Olivia's drawings. Betty had resumed her knitting, but her needles moved more slowly, as if reflecting the tension in the air. It was Maris who finally broke the silence. "What if..." She stopped, biting her lip as if carefully considering her next words. "What if I went to Richard's house?" "What?" exclaimed several of those present at the same time. "Think about it," she continued, getting up and starting to walk around the room. "Richard doesn't know me personally. He must have investigated about me, but I doubt he's seen recent photos. I could present myself as a possible buyer interested in the neighboring house. They say he's always wanted to sell the land next door." "No," Theodore protested, trying to get up. "It's too dangerous." "More dangerous is losing everything now," she replied, a steely determination in her voice. You risked everything to help us, Theodore. It's time to return the favor. Olivia, who had returned to her drawings, raised her head suddenly. The numbers agree with Mom, she said, surprising everyone. They show a golden path, like a thread of light between the dark clouds. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, calling attention. From a medical point of view, Maris is strong enough for a short excursion, as long as she doesn't overdo it and keeps up with her medication. I'll go with her, declared Betty, putting away her knitting. I can pose as her mother, interested in buying the house to be near her daughter. No one would suspect two women looking at real estate. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes shining with professional interest. We can equip them with discreet microphones, if they can get Richard to talk about the documents, or better yet, if they can get access to his computer. I don't like this, murmured Theodore, but his voice already showed resignation. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, affirmed Olivia, with that unwavering certainty that only children possess. The numbers showed me. It's how it has to be. Albert, who had been absorbed in Olivia's drawings, let out a surprised exclamation. Look at this, he called, pointing to a specific pattern. She drew what looks like a floor plan, and these numbers on the margins look like coordinates. Everyone crowded around the table, observing Olivia's new drawing. In fact, among the complex mathematical patterns, there was a clear sketch of a house, with a specific room marked with a series of glowing symbols. It's the office, Olivia said simply. It's where the bad numbers hide. Maris knelt down next, to her daughter holding her small hands. Are you sure about this, my love? Absolutely sure. Olivia nodded solemnly. The numbers never lie, Mom. They just get confused sometimes when bad people try to hurt them, like Mr. Miller did. Theodore watched the scene with a heavy heart. The absolute trust between mother and daughter, Olivia's inexplicable wisdom, Maris's courage. How had he spent so many years without realizing that there were things more important than balance sheets and financial reports? It's decided then, said Beatrice, already, picking up her phone. I'll arrange the listening equipment and prepare a discreet support team. Mrs. Maris, Mrs. Betty, we can start preparations early tomorrow. As the adults discussed the details of the plan, Olivia went back to Theodore. She climbed onto the bed with the agility of a child and laid her head on his chest, exactly over his heart. Your numbers are worried, she murmured, but they don't need to be. Sometimes for the numbers to dance right, we have to trust the music, even without hearing it yet. Theodore couldn't help but smile. And do you hear this music, sweetie? Yes, she replied, her eyes already heavy with sleep. It's the music that plays when the bad numbers go away and the good numbers can dance in peace again. As Olivia fell asleep on his chest, Theodore watched Maris and the others finalizing the preparations for the risky plan for the next day. His heart beat irregularly, but there was something different now, a new cadence, as if he were finally learning to dance to the right rhythm. Morning dawned cloudy over Phoenix, as if the sky itself shared the apprehension that hung over the 10th floor of St. Francis Hospital. In Theodore's room, a nervous energy dominated the environment as the last preparations were made for the risky mission. Maris was unrecognizable. Beatrice had arranged a complete transformation. Brown wigs that perfectly covered her baldness caused by chemotherapy, professional makeup that disguised her pallor, and an elegant outfit that made her look like a prosperous businesswoman from the interior. Betty had also undergone a change, wearing a tweed suit and discreet jewelry that belonged to Beatrice herself. "Is the microphone well hidden?" asked Maris for the third time, nervously adjusting the delicate brooch on her lapel, where the listening device was installed. "Perfectly," assured Albert, who was supervising the technical equipment, "and the receiver on Mrs. Betty's cell phone is working without problems. We'll be able to hear everything." Theodore watched the preparations from his bed, where he was connected to various monitors. During the night, he had presented some worrying arrhythmias, which led Dr. Harrison to increase the medication and monitoring. "We can still cancel this," he said, his voice betraying his concern. "I can try another approach with the board." "No," cut Maris, approaching his bed. "You risked everything for us. Now it's our turn." Olivia, who was sitting on the floor surrounded by her drawings, stood up suddenly. "Wait, Mom! Something's missing!" Everyone watched as the girl ran to her pink backpack in the corner of the room and took something out of it. It was a small quartz crystal. "For protection," she said, handing the crystal to her mother. "The numbers told me it will help you find the right path in the big house." Maris held the crystal tightly, tears shining in her eyes. "I'll carry it close to my heart, my love." Dr. Harrison entered the room at that moment, carrying a small medical bag. "Mrs. Maris, here are your medications. You can't delay any dose. It's crucial for the synchronization of the treatment. And you, Theodore," continued the doctor, turning to his patient, "need to stay calm. Your heart can't take any more shocks." "How can I stay calm?" Theodore protested, but was interrupted by Olivia, who climbed onto the bed and placed her hand on his chest as she always did. "The numbers are showing me something," she said, her big eyes fixed on something that only she could see. Uncle Theodore's heart and Mom's blood, they're connected now like a dance. If one dances too fast or too slow, the other feels it. Dr. Harrison approached, interested. "Fascinating. That would explain why the treatments are so synchronized. It's as if we've created a kind of therapeutic symbiosis." "All the more reason for us to be careful," said Betty, adjusting her new gloves. "Let's do this right, daughter. For Theodore, for Olivia, for all of us." Beatrice, who was on the phone, hung up and approached the group. "The support team is positioned. We have 3 discrete cars in the perimeter of Richard's house and a computer specialist ready to act if we get access to the computer. Remember," instructed Albert, "we need concrete evidence, photos of the documents, incriminating recordings, anything that proves the fraud." Maris took a deep breath, adjusting her blazer for the last time. "How will we know where to look exactly?" "The numbers already showed," replied Olivia, taking one of her most recent drawings. "Look, Mom, the office is on the 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right. The computer with the bad numbers is near the window that overlooks the garden." Albert examined the drawing, impressed. "The precision of these details, it's incredible. She even drew what appeared to be password patterns." "They're the songs that the numbers sing when they want to hide," Olivia explained naturally. "But they don't hide from me." At that moment, Beatrice's cell phone vibrated. "It's time," she announced, checking the message. "Richard just left home for a meeting. We have approximately 2 hours." A tense silence fell over the room. Maris hugged Olivia for a long time, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair as if she wanted to keep that feeling. "Promise you'll be back soon," whispered Olivia. "I promise, my love. And when I come back, we'll be closer to all being well." Betty hugged her granddaughter too, letting a tear escape. "Take care of Uncle Theodore for us, sweetie. Don't let his numbers get agitated." When the 2 women were already at the door, Theodore called, "Maris!" She turned around and their eyes met. There was so much to be said, so many unspoken words hovering between them. "Thank you," was all he could say. Maris smiled, a smile that lit up her transformed face. "Let's save the thanks for when this is all over." After they left, the room seemed strangely empty, despite the presence of Olivia, Dr. Harrison, Albert, and the medical equipment. The girl climbed back onto Theodore's bed, assuming her usual position with her hand over his heart. "Now we have to be very quiet," she said in a confidential tone, "to be able to hear the music that the numbers are going to dance to." The next hours were a torture of waiting and anxiety. Through the listening system, they could hear fragments of the conversation between Maris and Betty with Richard's housekeeper, who fortunately bit the bait of the story about interest in the neighboring house. "You'll love the neighborhood," said the housekeeper, her voice slightly distorted by the equipment. "It's very quiet and the sunset view is spectacular." "Oh, it would be wonderful to have my afternoon tea admiring that view," replied Betty, sounding perfectly convincing in her role as a wealthy woman from the interior. Theodore barely breathed as he listened to the interaction, his heart monitors revealing his growing tension. Olivia, noticing his agitation, began to sing softly a gentle melody, something that sounded like a lullaby mixed with numerical sequences. Suddenly, Maris's voice became clearer in the receiver. "Would it be possible to see the second floor? I'd like to get an idea of the layout of the rooms, to compare with the neighboring house." There was a moment of tension when the housekeeper hesitated, but Betty quickly interfered. "You know how young people are today, dear. My daughter is an architect. She loves to study floor plans of similar houses to get ideas." "Well, I guess there's no problem in taking a quick look," conceded the housekeeper. The following minutes were filled only with sounds of footsteps and casual comments about the decoration. Theodore held Olivia's hand tightly while Albert and Beatrice made frantic notes. "Oh, what an interesting door," exclaimed Maris suddenly. "Is that the owner's office?" "Yes, but that area is private," replied the housekeeper quickly. "Mr. Miller is very reserved with his documents." "Naturally," agreed Maris, "but you know how it is. I was just curious because in the design of the house next door, we're thinking of making a similar office. The position of the window to the garden is perfect for—" She was interrupted by the piercing sound of a telephone. "Oh, excuse me," said the housekeeper. "I need to answer that. If you could give me a moment." As soon as the housekeeper's footsteps moved away, Maris's voice came urgently on the receiver. "Quick, Mom, watch the corridor." The next minutes were a succession of muffled sounds. The click of a door being opened, hurried footsteps, the soft hum of a computer starting. "Olivia, my love," whispered Maris through the microphone, "where exactly should your mother look?" The girl jumped off the bed, running to her drawings. "In the third drawer, Mom. There's a blue folder with sad numbers, and on the computer, the password is like that song that Grandpa used to sing at Christmas, remember?" Theodore looked at Olivia in amazement. How could she know? "My God!" Maris's voice cut through his thoughts. "I found it! They're all the documents. Wait! I'm hearing footsteps!" The sound of a door slamming echoed through the receiver, followed by the housekeeper's alarmed voice. "Mr. Miller, you're back early." Chaos erupted in the hospital room. Theodore's heart monitors began to beep frantically. Dr. Harrison rushed to administer emergency medication, while Beatrice and Albert shouted instructions through the receiver. But Olivia remained strangely calm. She returned to Theodore's bed, placed her hand on his chest again, and began to sing her peculiar melody of numbers. "There's no need to be afraid," she said softly. "The good numbers always win over the bad numbers in the end. That's how math works." Through the receiver, they could hear Richard's furious voice. "Who are you? What are you doing in my office?" Maris's response came clear and firm, surprising everyone. "Exactly what you did on Theodore's computer, Mr. Miller, looking for the truth in the numbers." The silence that followed Maris's statement was deafening. In the hospital room, everyone present held their breath, listening to every sound that came through the receiver. Theodore's heart monitors recorded alarming spikes, but he barely noticed. The alerts, focusing only on the voice that returned to sound through the equipment. "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard's voice sounded controlled, but with an almost imperceptible tremor. "Get out of my house now, or I'll call the police." "You won't do that," replied Maris, her voice surprisingly firm. "Because if you call the police, you'll have to explain these documents I found, and you'll also have to explain why you installed a spyware program on Theodore Albright's personal computer." In the hospital, Beatrice and Albert exchanged surprised glances. How did Maris know about the spyware program? That information wasn't in Olivia's drawings. Or was it? "Mom is using the right numbers," said Olivia softly, still with her hand on Theodore's heart. "The ones that make bad people get confused." Through the receiver, they heard heavy footsteps. Richard was moving through the office. "I don't know who you are, but you clearly have no idea what dangerous game you're getting into." "On the contrary," Betty's voice emerged, loaded with an authority that surprised everyone. "We know exactly what game this is. You've been diverting money from the company for years, using phantom companies. And now that Theodore is sick, you plan to use that fragility to take total control." How do you... Richard's voice now conveyed true fear. In the hospital, Dr. Harrison administered more medication in Theodore's IV, concerned about his increasingly unstable vital signs. "We need to do something," he murmured. "His heart won't take so much tension." That's when Olivia began to sing. Again, but this time it was different. It wasn't her usual melody of numbers. It was something more structured, as if she were deciphering a code aloud. 4, 7, 2, 8, 9, 3. The childish voice echoed clearly through the room. Through the receiver, they heard Maris repeat the numbers, followed by the unmistakable sound of keys being pressed, and then the beep of a safe opening. "No!" shouted Richard. "How? That's impossible!" "The safe behind the painting," said Olivia, still singing softly. "The sad numbers are all in there, crying to be freed." In Richard's office, the sound of papers being handled was clearly audible. "Here it all is," said Maris, her voice trembling slightly with the discovery. "All the receipts, all the transfers. You didn't leave anything to chance, did you, Mr. Miller?" "You can't prove anything." Richard's voice now sounded desperate. "These documents don't mean anything without context." That's when Betty made her most brilliant move. "Honey, are you finished copying everything?" A new character entered the scene. It was George, the computer specialist that Beatrice had positioned as a fake driver. His voice sounded through the receiver. "Yes, ma'am. All the files on the computer have been copied, and the documents from the safe are already being photographed and sent to Dr. Beatrice." In the hospital, Beatrice confirmed on her tablet the receipt of the files in real time, a smile of satisfaction on her face. "It's over, Theodore. We have everything we need." But something was wrong. The heart monitors began to emit more intense alerts, and Theodore felt a sharp pain in his chest, different from all the previous ones. "Mom!" shouted Olivia suddenly, her eyes wide with fear. "The numbers! They're screaming! There's something wrong with Uncle Theodore." Through the receiver, they heard Maris gasp. "No, not now. The treatment." "What is it?" Richard's voice sounded confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. "We need to get back to the hospital," said Maris, urgently. "Mr. Miller, you have two options. You can try to stop us and face not only the legal consequences of your fraud, but also the responsibility for interrupting an experimental medical treatment that is saving 2 lives. Or you can do the right thing for the first time." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. In the hospital, Dr. Harrison fought to stabilize Theodore, while Olivia continued with her hand on his chest, now crying silently. "His numbers are very dark," she sobbed. "They need Mom to dance right again." Finally, Richard's voice returned, but it was different, defeated, tired. "Go, but this isn't over." "On the contrary, Mr. Miller," replied Betty, her voice loaded with ancient wisdom. "It's over. You just haven't realized it yet." The next minutes were a blur of activity. In the hospital, the medical team worked frantically to stabilize Theodore, while Beatrice coordinated with her external team the protection and transport of the documents obtained. When Maris finally burst into the hospital room, still wearing her now disheveled disguise, the scene she found was one of controlled chaos. Theodore was conscious, but visibly weakened. Olivia had not left his side for a moment. "Quick," instructed Dr. Harrison, already preparing the equipment for the treatment. "We need to re-establish the synchronization immediately." Maris didn't even bother to change clothes. She lay down on the gurney that the nurses had brought next to Theodore's bed and reached out for the medication. Olivia placed herself between the two, one hand on each of their chests. "Now sing together," she said with that peculiar seriousness. "The numbers need to remember the right song." To everyone's surprise, Theodore began to murmur weakly a sequence of numbers. Maris instinctively joined her voice to his. It was as if they were reciting a secret code that only they and Olivia understood. Gradually, the heart monitors began to stabilize. The color returned to Theodore's face, and Maris's breathing became more regular. "Incredible," murmured Dr. Harrison, observing the data on his monitors. "The synchronization is re-establishing itself on its own. It's as if their organisms have developed a kind of biological memory of each other." Betty, who was watching everything from her usual corner, had resumed her knitting, but now her needles moved in a different pattern, the same rhythm as the number singing of Theodore and Maris. "It's not biological memory, Doctor," she said softly. "It's something deeper, something that only a child who sees through numbers could have discovered." Beatrice, who until then had been absorbed in her tablet organizing the collected evidence, looked up with an expression of astonishment. "You need to see this," she said, turning the screen so that everyone could see. "The documents we found aren't just about Richard's fraud." "What do you mean?" asked Albert, approaching to examine the files. "There are records here. Old records about a specific policy that Richard implemented 6 years ago in the company. A policy of systematic dismissal of employees who requested leave for family issues." Theodore and Maris exchanged a meaningful look. 6 years ago, exactly when she'd been fired for needing to care for newborn Olivia. "He created a system," continued Beatrice, scrolling through the documents, "a system to identify and eliminate what he called problem employees, and he used the money saved from the dismissals to feed his secret accounts." "So, it wasn't just a business decision," murmured Theodore, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "It was a deliberate scheme, and I allowed it to happen right under my nose." "The bad numbers tricked you, Uncle Theodore," said Olivia, still keeping her hands on both of them. "But now the good numbers are fixing everything." At that moment, Beatrice's cell phone rang. It was her investigation team. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a satisfied smile. "Richard just called his lawyer," she informed them. "He's prepared to make a deal. He'll resign from his position and return all the money diverted." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but it was interrupted by a perceptive comment from Olivia. "The numbers haven't finished dancing yet," she said, her expression serious. "There's more music to play before the end." Everyone looked at the girl, intrigued. What else could be coming? What more did those mysterious numbers, which only Olivia could see and understand, still have to reveal? The days that followed Richard's downfall were intense at St. Francis Hospital. While Beatrice and her team worked tirelessly to organize the evidence and negotiate the terms of the agreement with Richard's lawyers, an even deeper transformation was taking place on the 10th floor. Dr. Harrison had converted one of the rooms into a small makeshift research center where he spent hours analyzing the data from the experimental treatment. The walls were covered with graphs, exams, and of course Olivia's drawings, which now presented even more complex and intriguing patterns. "It's extraordinary," he explained one morning while presenting his findings to a small group of medical specialists he had summoned. The synchronization between the two patients goes beyond anything we've ever documented in the medical literature. On the presentation screen, graphs showed Theodore's heart waves perfectly aligned with Maris's bone marrow regeneration cycles. It was like a perfectly choreographed biological dance. "But how is that possible?" questioned one of the visiting doctors, Dr. Carroll, a specialist in immunology. "It's as if their immune systems are communicating." "Exactly," exclaimed Dr. Harrison, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "And the key to understanding this is here." He projected one of Olivia's latest drawings. At first glance, it seemed just a mess of numbers and colored lines, but under closer scrutiny, it revealed a complex pattern that bore a striking resemblance to the medical graphs. "This child," he continued, "somehow manages to visualize and represent patterns that our most advanced equipment barely begins to detect." In the next room, oblivious to the medical discussion, Theodore and Maris were personally experiencing the effects of this extraordinary connection. They were sitting in armchairs near the window, participating in what Olivia called number dance time, a period of the day in which, according to her, the healing patterns were strongest. "It's strange," commented Maris, observing the IV that ran into her vein. "I can feel when your heartbeats change. It's like we've become part of the same song," completed Theodore, smiling slightly. "Olivia explained this to us from the beginning, didn't she? We just didn't have the ability to understand." The girl, who was sitting on the floor between them, looked up from her newest drawing. "Your numbers are getting more and more beautiful," she said. "Before they were all different colors. Now they're learning to shine together." Betty, in her usual spot with her knitting, smiled at her granddaughter's comment. Her needles moved in a rhythm that, curiously, seemed to accompany the beep of the heart monitors. "You know what this reminds me of," said the woman, her eyes distant in old memories. "My grandmother's loom. She always said that the threads knew how to intertwine, that all you had to do was listen to the right rhythm." At that moment, Beatrice entered the room, carrying a thick folder of documents. Her normally composed face showed signs of worry. "Theodore," she said, hesitating in a way that was unusual for her assertive personality, "we found something in Richard's files. Something I think you need to see." She removed a set of papers from the folder, documents yellowed by time. They were dated 30 years ago. "This was hidden in an encrypted folder on Richard's computer," she explained. "Apparently, he had been keeping this as a kind of guarantee for years." Theodore took the papers with trembling hands. As he read, his face lost color. The heart monitors began to record changes, and instantly Maris took her hand to her chest, feeling the echo of that disturbance in her own body. "What is it?" she asked, worried. "They're records from my father's old company," replied Theodore, his voice hoarse. Before everything went wrong." Olivia stood up suddenly, her eyes fixed on the papers. "The numbers on these papers. They're related to your numbers, Uncle Theodore, but they're very sad, very hurt." Theodore closed his eyes, painful memories flooding his mind. "My father was a brilliant man," he began, his voice laden with emotion. "A mathematician who abandoned academia to try his luck in business. He had revolutionary theories about mathematical patterns in the economy, but no one believed in him." "His numbers were different," interrupted Olivia, now drawing frantically. "Like mine. He also saw them dancing, didn't he?" The shock on Theodore's face was visible. "How do you—" "Yes, he always said that he could see patterns where others only saw random numbers. Everyone thought he was crazy." "What happened?" asked Maris softly, feeling through her inexplicable connection the pain that those memories caused in Theodore. "He developed a system, a revolutionary method of market forecasting. But when he tried to implement it in his company, something went wrong. The numbers failed, or so everyone thought." Theodore paused, his hands squeezing the documents. The company went bankrupt. He lost everything. And You abandoned mathematics to become a conventional businessman. Completed. Beatrice softly. To never make the same mistake as your father. But it wasn't a mistake, exclaimed Olivia, raising her new drawing. Look, your father's numbers were right. Someone changed them, hurt them on purpose. Everyone bent over the girl's drawing. It was an impressive representation of the same. Data from the old documents, but with an additional layer of patterns that revealed something shocking. My God, murmured Beatrice, her eyes widening. That's deliberate data manipulation. Someone altered your father's original numbers, Theodore. They sabotaged his system. At that moment, Dr. Harrison entered the room with his visiting specialists, but stopped when he felt the tension in the environment. What's going on? He asked, noticing the changes on the monitors. Quite a revelation, Doctor, replied Betty, her knitting needles momentarily still. It seems that my granddaughter's gift isn't so unique after all. She inherited it from someone she never met. Uncle Theodore's grandfather, exclaimed Olivia, still drawing. His numbers were special, like mine. But bad people hurt them, and that's why Uncle Theodore was afraid of numbers for a long time. Dr. Carroll approached, fascinated by Olivia's drawings. This is extraordinary, the way she represents the patterns. It's almost identical to some recent theories about cellular communication at the quantum level. Quantum? Asked Maris, confused. Yes, exclaimed Dr. Harrison, a light of understanding in his eyes. That's it. That's why the treatment is working so well. It's not just a common biological synchronization. It's communication at a quantum level between immune systems. Like my father's theory, murmured Theodore, his voice trembling. He always said that numbers weren't just symbols, that there was a universal music connecting everything. The numbers always knew, said Olivia, simply completing her drawing with a final flourish. They were just waiting for someone who could hear them again. Beatrice, always practical, was already on the phone. I'm going to put my team to investigate who was behind the sabotage of your father's company, Theodore. With these documents and Olivia's analysis... No need, interrupted Olivia, surprising everyone. The numbers are already showing who it was. But that dance can only be danced tomorrow. Today, Uncle Theodore and Mom need to rest. Their numbers are still learning the most important music. And what would that music be, sweetie? Asked Betty, resuming her knitting with a knowing smile. Olivia looked out the window, where the sun was beginning to set over Phoenix, painting the sky with colors that strangely resembled the patterns in her drawings. The music of forgiveness, she replied softly. It's the hardest of all, because it needs to be danced with the heart, not just with the numbers. Theodore and Maris exchanged a deep look, their hands meeting instinctively. At that moment, the monitors recorded something remarkable. Their heartbeats were perfectly synchronized, as if their hearts had finally found the right rhythm of the dance that Olivia talked about so much. Morning arrived at St. Francis Hospital, loaded with expectations. The 10th floor was in an uproar early on, when a surprising discovery shook everyone. Beatrice had arrived before dawn, carrying an old box of documents that her team had found in an abandoned warehouse belonging to Richard. I couldn't wait until later, she explained, spreading the papers on the table in Theodore's room. This changes everything. Theodore, who was stronger after a surprisingly restful night's sleep, examined the documents with trembling hands. They were old records, some so fragile that they threatened to fall apart at the touch. Letters, internal memos, and most importantly, a diary belonging to Anthony Miller, Richard's father. Anthony Miller, murmured Theodore, the name bringing memories long buried. He was the chief accountant of my father's company. Olivia, who was drawing in her usual corner, raised her head abruptly. His numbers were very dark, she said, dropping her pencil, so dark that they stained all the other numbers. Maris, who was doing her morning exercises near the window, approached to see better. Her recovery in recent days had been remarkable. The colors had returned to her face, and her movements were more firm. "What exactly did you find?" she asked, sitting next to Theodore. Immediately, the heart monitors of both recorded a perfect synchronization in their heartbeats. Beatrice picked up a specific document, her hands trembling slightly, something rare for the ever-so-controlled lawyer. "It's a confession," she said. "Anthony Miller wrote this shortly before he died. He admits to deliberately sabotaging the mathematical system developed by your father, Theodore." The silence that fell over the room was broken only by the soft sound of Betty's knitting, who has always watched everything from her corner. "But why?" asked Theodore, his voice choked with emotion. "Why destroy something so revolutionary?" Olivia stood up suddenly, running to the box of documents. With the precision of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for, she removed a specific sheet from the middle of the pile. "Here," she said, pointing to a sequence of numbers. "The sad numbers start here. That's when his heart turned black." Beatrice picked up the document indicated by Olivia. It was a contract dated 30 years ago, establishing a partnership between a group of foreign investors and Anthony Miller. "They offered him a fortune to sabotage the system," explained Beatrice, reading quickly. "Apparently, if your father's method worked, Theodore, it would completely change the financial market. Certain powerful people would lose a lot of money. And Richard," asked Maris, feeling through her inexplicable connection the storm of emotions that agitated Theodore. "Did he know about this?" "According to his father's diary, Richard discovered everything as a teenager," replied Beatrice. "And instead of revealing the truth, he used that knowledge to blackmail his own father and build his empire." At that moment, Dr. Harrison entered the room, accompanied by Dr. Carroll. Both carried a pile of exam results and seemed agitated. "You need to see this," said Harrison, barely containing his excitement. "The latest analyses of the treatment. It's revolutionary." "As much as my father's system?" asked Theodore bitterly. "Actually," interjected Carroll, "we believe there's a connection. Dr. Harrison showed me some of your father's original theories, Theodore. The way he described the mathematical patterns is impressively similar to what we're observing in the synchronization between you and Maris." Olivia, who had returned to her drawings, began to sing softly a sequence of numbers. It was a strange, almost hypnotic melody that made everyone in the room stop to listen. "That music," murmured Theodore, his eyes widening. "My father used to sing it when he was working on his equations." "They're the numbers dancing," explained Olivia simply. "Your father saw them dancing like I see, but he saw them dancing in the markets and in the companies. I see them dancing in the hearts and blood of people." Dr. Harrison approached Olivia's drawings with renewed interest. "It's fascinating. Your father's theory about interconnected patterns in the financial market is structurally similar to what we observe in the communication between immune systems. As if everything follows a great cosmic dance," completed Carol, her eyes shining with scientific enthusiasm. "Markets, cells, healing, all connected by fundamental mathematical patterns." Betty put aside her knitting for the first time in days. "I always knew my granddaughter was special," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "but I never imagined that her gift was part of something so big." Maris hugged her daughter, silent tears streaming down her face. "That's why you made me promise I would never give up on mathematics, isn't it, my love? Even when the teacher said your calculations were too different?" Olivia nodded, returning the hug. "The numbers always knew that we needed to find Uncle Theodore, because only when his numbers and yours danced together would everyone understand that my grandfather was right." "But I still don't understand," said Theodore, running a hand through his greying hair. "How does it all connect? My father's system, the treatment, Olivia's gift." That's when the girl picked up a new paper and began to draw with impressive speed. Her small fingers flew over the sheet, creating increasingly complex patterns. "Look!" exclaimed Dr. Harrison, leaning over the drawing in progress. "She's graphically representing the complete theory. The connection between Theodore's father's economic patterns and the biological patterns of our treatment. As Olivia drew, a deep understanding began to form in everyone present. It wasn't just about numbers, markets, or medicine. It was about fundamental connections that permeated all existence, connections that most people couldn't see, but that some special individuals, like Theodore's father and Olivia, were able to see and translate. "Your father's numbers were never wrong, Uncle." "Theodore," said Olivia, completing her drawing with a final flourish. "They were just waiting for the right moment to dance again, and it needed to be now, when your heart and Mom's blood have learned to dance together." Beatrice, who had been absorbed in the documents, let out a surprised exclamation. "There's one more thing here," she said, removing a sealed envelope from the bottom of the box. "It's a letter from Anthony Miller, addressed to you, Theodore. Apparently he wrote it shortly before his death, with specific instructions to only be delivered when the numbers dance again." Theodore took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was yellowed by time, but the seal remained intact. Before he could open it, however, Olivia placed her small hand over his. "Not yet," she said softly. "The numbers say we need to wait a little longer. First, Uncle Theodore's heart and Mom's blood need to finish their most important dance." "And when will that be?" asked Maris, instinctively taking her hand to her own heart. Olivia looked out the window where the sun was beginning to tint the phoenix sky with surreal colors. "Tomorrow," she replied, her eyes reflecting an ancient wisdom. "When the sun rises, the numbers will sing their most beautiful song. And then everyone will understand why we needed to be together." In this hospital, Dr. Harrison consulted his exams quickly. "Interestingly, tomorrow marks exactly the critical point of the treatment. It's when we'll know definitively if the synchronization between the two systems worked." "It's not a coincidence," said Betty, resuming her knitting with a serene smile. None of this was a coincidence. As night fell on the hospital, an atmosphere of expectation hung in the air. On the monitors, Theodore and Maris's heartbeats continued in perfect harmony, as if rehearsing for the big performance of the next day. And Olivia, surrounded by her drawings, continued singing softly her song of numbers, preparing the way for the final revelation that was to come. The 10th floor of St. Francis Hospital was plunged into an expectant silence as the first rays of sun began to penetrate through the windows. It was a dawn unlike any other. The air seemed denser, loaded with possibilities. In Theodore's room, an almost palpable energy pulsed in the environment. Dr. Harrison had arrived before sunrise, accompanied by a full team of specialists. Dr. Carroll coordinated the installation of additional monitoring equipment, while other doctors prepared to document every aspect of what promised to be a historic moment in medicine. "The values are surprisingly stable," commented Carroll, observing the monitors. "The synchronization between the two patients has reached levels we've never recorded before." Theodore and Maris were in their beds side by side, connected to a series of devices that measured not only their vital signs, but also a variety of other biological parameters. The most impressive was the three-dimensional representation of the cellular activity of both patients, projected in a hologram in the center of the room. "It's like a cosmic dance," commented Dr. Carroll, adjusting her glasses as she watched the cells move in synchronized patterns. Each movement, each chemical reaction, everything follows a precise math that we had never identified before. Olivia was sitting at her small makeshift table, now surrounded not only by her usual drawings, but also by a team of mathematicians who had arrived in a hurry from Arizona State University. Professor David Miller, a 70-year-old man considered one of the greatest authorities on number theory in the country, could barely contain his emotion. "It's extraordinary," he exclaimed repeatedly, comparing Olivia's drawings with complex equations on his tablet. "The girl is intuitively representing concepts that have taken us decades to develop mathematically, and some of these patterns haven't even been formally theorized yet. But the real revolution was happening in the patients themselves. The exams performed during the morning showed a recovery that defied all medical expectations. As if everything follows a great cosmic dance," completed Carol, her eyes shining with scientific enthusiasm. "Markets, cells, healing, all connected by fundamental mathematical patterns." Betty set aside her knitting for the first time in days. "I always knew my granddaughter was special," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But I never imagined that her gift was part of something so big." Maurice hugged her daughter, silent tears streaming down her face. "That's why you made me promise I would never give up on mathematics, isn't it, my love? Even when the teachers said your calculations were too different." Olivia nodded, returning the hug. "The numbers always knew that we needed to find Uncle Theodore, because only when his numbers and yours danced together would everyone understand that my grandfather was right." But I still don't understand," said Theodore, running a hand through his graying hair. "How does it all connect? My father's system, the treatment, Olivia's gift." That's when the girl picked up a new paper and began to draw with impressive speed. Her small fingers flew over the sheet, creating increasingly complex patterns. "Look!" exclaimed Dr. Harrison, leaning over the drawing in progress. "She's graphically representing the complete theory. The connection between Theodore's father's economic patterns and the biological patterns of our treatment." As Olivia drew, a deep understanding began to form in everyone present. It wasn't just about numbers, markets, or medicine. It was about fundamental connections that permeated all existence. Connections that most people couldn't see, but that some special individuals, like Theodore's father and Olivia, were able to see and translate. "Your father's numbers were never wrong, Uncle Theodore," said Olivia, completing her drawing with a final flourish. "They were just waiting for the right moment to dance again. And it needed to be now, when your heart and Mom's blood have learned to dance together." Beatrice, who had been absorbed in the documents, let out a surprised exclamation. "There's one more letter here, and this one is different. It's from Theodore's own father." The silence fell over the room as she opened the yellowed envelope. The handwriting was shaky, as if it had been written with great effort. "My son, if you are reading this letter, it means that the numbers have finally found their way back. I always knew that one day this would happen, not because I was a mathematical genius, as some said, but because I understood a fundamental truth. Numbers are not just symbols on a paper. They are the very pulse of the universe. What I discovered was not just a system for predicting markets. It was a key to understanding how everything is connected, from the smallest particle to the largest galaxy, from the simplest heartbeat to the most complex economic system. Everything dances to the same music, Theodore. Everything follows the same divine rhythm. When they tried to destroy me, it wasn't out of fear of what I could do in the financial market. It was out of fear of what that understanding could awaken in people. Because when you understand that everything is connected, that each number sings its part in a universal symphony, you can never see the world in the same way again. I know you abandoned the numbers after what happened to me. I know you chose a different path, trying to protect yourself from the pain. But the numbers never abandoned you, son. They just waited for the right moment, when you found someone who could help you hear the music again. Take good care of this gift, Theodore. It's not just yours, or mine, or the little one who certainly helped you rediscover it. It's a gift for all of humanity, a reminder that in the end, we are all part of the same cosmic dance, with eternal love, your father. When Beatrice finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Theodore and Maris wept openly, their hands intertwined. In the space between the beds, the doctors and scientists present, accustomed to dealing with facts and concrete data, found themselves deeply touched by something that transcended their rational understanding. Olivia picked up a new paper and began to draw, her fingers moving with a particular grace. What emerged wasn't one of her usual mathematical diagrams, but something different, a musical score where instead of notes there were numbers dancing between the lines. "It's the complete music," she said softly. "The one that your father used to hear, Uncle Theodore. The one that was waiting for all of us to find each other so it could be sung again." And as the afternoon sun bathed the room in golden hues, a profound understanding took hold of all those present. They were witnessing not only a miraculous cure or a revolutionary scientific discovery, but the awakening of an ancient truth that had been temporarily forgotten, the truth that in the heart of all existence pulses a sacred mathematics that connects all things, all beings, all moments. The dance of the numbers was only beginning its new melody. The sun set over Phoenix, painting the sky with colors that seemed to dance in perfect mathematical patterns. 6 months had passed since that extraordinary day at St. Francis Hospital, and the world of medicine would never be the same. The Olivia Protocol, as the revolutionary treatment came to be known, was transforming the way doctors understood healing and the connection between the systems of the human body. The 10th floor of the hospital, formerly a common treatment wing, had become an international research center. Doctors and scientists from all over the world came to study the phenomenon that had begun with the unlikely connection between a repentant businessman and a wronged former employee, catalyzed by the extraordinary gift of a child who saw music in numbers. On that particular afternoon, Theodore walked through the corridors of the hospital, no longer as a patient, but as director of the newly created Biomathematical Research Institute. His hair had turned completely white in recent months, but his eyes shone with a vitality that not even his closest friends remembered having seen before. "The results are extraordinary," explained Dr. Harrison to a group of visiting researchers as they walked down the corridor filled with monitors displaying complex patterns. The application of the Olivia Protocol has already shown positive results in more than 200 cases of diseases previously considered untreatable. But the most fascinating thing, added Dr. Carroll, who now coordinated the immunological research team, is how each new case helps us to better understand the fundamental mathematics of life. It's as if each patient adds a new note to the symphony that Olivia taught us to hear. Passing by the old treatment room, now converted into a state-of-the-art laboratory, Theodore stopped to watch Maris, who was busy explaining some concepts to a group of medical students. She had become one of the leading researchers at the Institute, combining her experience as a patient with a natural talent for understanding the patterns that Olivia revealed. "Healing is not just a physical process," she explained, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived the miracle she now studied. "It's a complex dance between body, mind, and something more, something that we can only begin to understand through the universal language of mathematics." In the center of the laboratory, surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment and holographic screens, Olivia was sitting at her special table, now suited to her size. At 7 years old, she remained the beating heart of the entire operation. Her drawings, previously made with colored pencils on plain paper, were now digitized in real time, feeding complex algorithms that helped doctors personalize treatments for each patient. "The numbers are happier now," she said, looking up from her latest drawing when Theodore approached. "They can dance freely, as your father always wanted them to dance." Betty, who maintained her post as guardian even in this new, high-tech environment, smiled from her special chair, her knitting needles moving in the same rhythm as the patterns that pulsed on the screens around her. "You know," she said, watching, her granddaughter with teary eyes, "when Olivia was born and started murmuring numbers before she even spoke full words, I was worried. I thought it would be difficult for her, being so different. I never imagined that her difference would be exactly what the world needed." At that moment, Beatrice entered the laboratory, carrying a folder of documents. In recent months, she had dedicated herself not only to legally protecting the discoveries of the Institute, but also to uncovering more details about the story of Theodore's father. "We found something else," she announced, her eyes shining with excitement. "In the archives of the university where your father taught before entering the business world, they're notes from his last classes. And Theodore, you need to see this." Everyone gathered around the central table as Beatrice spread out the yellowed documents. They were pages upon pages of equations, diagrams, and notes, but what was striking were the drawings in the margins, drawings extraordinarily similar to those that Olivia made. "He saw the numbers dancing too," said Olivia simply, touching the pages with reverence. "But in his time, people weren't ready to understand the music." "And now they are?" asked Theodore softly. "Now it's different," she replied, beginning a new drawing. "Because it's not just one person listening to the music alone. Now everyone can listen together, each in their own way." As if to confirm her words, one of the monitors began to display data from a new patient who had just started treatment. The patterns that appeared on the screen were different from anything they had ever seen, but still maintained a familiar harmony. "Each person has their own music," explained Olivia, her fingers dancing on the paper as she reproduced the new patterns. "Like a big orchestra where each instrument plays its part. Healing happens when all the instruments find the right rhythm together." Professor David, who had become a frequent visitor to the Institute, approached with his tablet. "It's extraordinary," he said, comparing the new patterns with his equations. "Each new case shows us that Theodore's father's mathematics were even deeper than we imagined. It wasn't just a system for predicting markets, it was a unified theory of life itself." "And to think it almost got lost," commented Maris, approaching Theodore and holding his hand. The gesture, once unthinkable considering their complicated past, now seemed as natural as breathing. "Sometimes I wonder if all of this wasn't destined to happen exactly like this." "The numbers knew," said Olivia, without taking her eyes off her drawing. "They always knew that we needed to meet that day in the desert. They needed Uncle Theodore's hurt heart and Mom's sick blood to show that true healing only happens when different people learn to dance together." Dr. Harrison, who had been absorbed in some data, looked up with an expression of astonishment. "Look at this," he called, pointing to one of the screens. "The patterns of the new patient are aligning perfectly with your father's original theory, Theodore." Everyone turned to observe the phenomenon. On the main screen, waves of data pulsed in a hypnotic dance, forming patterns that seemed simultaneously mathematical and musical. "It's the signature of the universe," murmured Professor David, marveling. "The fundamental mathematics that connects all things was right there all along, waiting for us to learn to see." Olivia stood up from her table, carrying her new drawing. It was different from all the others, more complex, more profound, as if it captured not only mathematical patterns, but the very essence of life. "This one is special," she said, handing the drawing to Theodore. "It's the music that your father was trying to write. Now it's complete." Theodore looked at the drawing, and for a moment all the noise of the laboratory seemed to disappear. There, in the lines and numbers drawn by a child's hand, he could see, really see, the music that his father talked about so much. It was as if all the pieces of a cosmic puzzle finally fit together. "What do we do now?" asked Maris softly, also observing the drawing. It was Betty who answered, her knitting needles creating patterns that unconsciously mirrored those on the screens. "Now, my daughter, we do what the numbers always wanted us to do. We keep dancing, we keep learning, we keep healing. And we keep sharing the music," completed Olivia, her eyes shining with that ancient wisdom that never ceased to amaze everyone. Because the numbers don't want to dance alone anymore. They want everyone to learn to dance together. At that moment, as if the universe itself wanted to confirm her words, all the monitors in the laboratory began to pulse in perfect harmony. It was as if each patient, each researcher, each person in the institute was contributing their own note to a larger symphony. And there, in the heart of that scientific revolution that had begun with a child praying in the desert, Theodore finally understood his father's true legacy. It wasn't just a revolutionary mathematical system or a market theory ahead of its time. It was a much deeper and universal truth that everything in the universe, from heartbeats to market fluctuations, from regenerative cells to bonds of love and forgiveness, is part of the same cosmic dance, a sacred mathematics that connects all things. And now, thanks to a little girl who could see the music in numbers, that dance was finally being heard by everyone. Theodore's father's legacy lived not only in the revolutionary treatments or in the scientific discoveries, but in every healed heart, in every transformed life, in every new pattern that emerged from the depths of the universe to remind us that, in the end, we are all part of the same mathematical symphony. Night fell over Phoenix, and at the Biomathematical Research Institute, the numbers continued their eternal dance, now no longer in secret, but in an open celebration of infinite possibilities. And somewhere, beyond time and space, Theodore's father smiled, knowing that his music had finally found its perfect orchestra.